Harold, a 73-year-old widower, arrives at his son Michael's wedding only to discover that his seat at the table has been marked with the word burden instead of his name. As guests whisper and point, Harold endures the public humiliation orchestrated by his daughter-in-law Jessica, who has always seen him as an obstacle. But when the priest takes the microphone during the ceremony, unexpected revelations about Harold's past and hidden sacrifices come to light, completely transforming everyone's perception of who this man labeled a burden truly is. The morning sun filtered through my bedroom curtains as I adjusted my tie for the third time, my arthritic fingers struggling with the silk knot. Today was Michael's wedding day, my son's wedding day, and despite everything that had happened between us over the past 2 years, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing Martha's eyes looking back at me. She'd been gone for 5 years now, but moments like these made her absence feel fresh as an open wound. She would have known exactly what to say to calm my nerves, would have straightened this tie with gentle hands, and told me I looked handsome. "You'd be so proud of him today, sweetheart," I whispered to the empty room, touching the silver wedding band I still wore on my left hand. The drive to St. Andrew's Church took 45 minutes through traffic that seemed unusually heavy for a Saturday morning. I'd offered to help with the preparations weeks ago, but Jessica, my future daughter-in-law, had politely declined, saying they had everything under control. I understood. Young couples wanted their independence, and at 73, I'd learned when to step back. Or at least I thought I had. The church parking lot buzzed with activity as I pulled up in my old Honda. Luxury cars lined the spaces, BMWs, Mercedes, even a Tesla or two. I felt suddenly self-conscious about my weathered vehicle, but pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about me, this was Michael's day. Inside the church, the transformation took my breath away. White roses and baby's breath decorated every pew, and soft classical music drifted from hidden speakers. Jessica had exquisite taste, I had to admit. She'd created something beautiful here. "Harold, there you are." I turned to see Susan Martinez, Michael's godmother, and one of Martha's oldest friends. She enveloped me in a warm hug that smelled of familiar perfume and brought back a dozen memories. "You clean up well, old man," she said, with that mischievous smile that had charmed everyone for decades. "Martha would have been so proud today." "I keep thinking the same thing," I admitted, grateful for her presence. Susan had been a rock during those dark months after Martha's funeral, checking on me weekly, bringing casseroles I pretended to eat. "Have you seen Michael yet?" she asked, glancing around the bustling church. "Not yet. I figure he's busy with groomsmen duties. You know how these things go." Something flickered across Susan's face, a shadow of concern that was there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. "Harold, have you spoken to anyone about the reception arrangements?" "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, Jessica's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife through silk. "Oh, Harold, there you are." My son's bride-to-be glided toward us in a stunning off-white gown that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. Jessica Williams, soon to be Jessica Thompson, was undeniably beautiful, with the kind of polished elegance that came from private schools and country club memberships. At 28, she was everything I'd want for Michael. Educated, ambitious, and clearly devoted to him. So why did every interaction with her feel like walking on broken glass? "You look absolutely radiant, Jessica," I said, meaning every word. "Michael is a lucky man." Her smile was perfect, practiced. "Thank you, Harold. I hope you're ready for a wonderful celebration. We've put so much work into making today perfect." There was something in her tone, a subtle emphasis on certain words that made my stomach tighten. Susan shifted uncomfortably beside me. "I'm sure it will be beautiful," I replied carefully. "Is there anything you need help with?" "I'm happy to—" "Oh no, everything's handled," Jessica interrupted smoothly. "We have coordinators for everything. You just worry about enjoying yourself." She swept away in a cloud of expensive perfume, leaving Susan and me standing awkwardly by the church entrance. "Harold," Susan began quietly, "I think there's something you should—" "Dad!" Michael's voice boomed across the church vestibule, and my heart swelled at the sight of him. My son looked magnificent in his black tuxedo, every inch the successful corporate lawyer he'd become. At 35, he'd accomplished everything Martha and I had dreamed for him. Harvard Law, a prestigious firm, and now a beautiful wife. He crossed the space between us in quick strides and wrapped me in a hug that felt different somehow, tighter, more desperate. "I'm so glad you're here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, son. You look..." I pulled back to study his face, noting the tension around his eyes. "You look nervous." Michael laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just wedding jitters, you know. Big day. Your mother would be so proud," I said, squeezing his shoulder. "She always said you'd find someone special." His expression flickered. Pain, guilt, something I couldn't quite identify. "Dad, about the reception." "Michael," Jessica's voice called from across the room. "The photographer needs you for pictures with your groomsmen." My son glanced between me and his bride, conflict clear on his face. "We'll talk later, okay, Dad? At the reception." He hurried away, leaving me with an increasingly uncomfortable Susan and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I sat in the third pew, close enough to see the love shining in my son's eyes, as Jessica walked down the aisle, far enough back to feel like an observer rather than a participant. The vows were traditional but heartfelt, and when Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, I found myself wiping away tears I hadn't expected. Martha should have been here. She should have been crying happy tears beside me, whispering about how handsome our boy looked, planning what she'd say to Jessica's parents at the reception. The reception venue was even more impressive than the church, a historic mansion on the outskirts of town, its gardens meticulously manicured and decorated with thousands of twinkling lights. Ice sculptures gleamed under a massive white tent, and a live band played jazz standards that Martha would have loved. I followed the other guests toward the cocktail area, accepting congratulations from people I half remembered from Michael's childhood. Teachers, neighbors, family friends who'd watched him grow up. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me, asking about my health, sharing memories of Martha. It felt normal. It felt right. Until I saw the seating chart. The elegant display board near the tent entrance listed table assignments for the 150 wedding guests. I scanned the alphabetical list looking for Thompson Harold. I found it on table 12, but next to my name, instead of the beautiful calligraphy used for every other guest, someone had attached a small white label, Burden. I stared at it, certain I was misreading. The label was perfectly neat, professionally printed, not a mistake, not a typo. Burden. Oh my God. Susan breathed beside me. She'd found the chart and was staring at the same thing I was. "Harold, this can't be right." But even as she spoke, I noticed other guests gathering around the seating chart, their voices dropping to whispers as they spotted my table assignment. A few pointed discreetly in my direction. Someone stifled a gasp. Heat flooded my cheeks as the implications hit me like physical blows. This wasn't an accident. Someone, Jessica most likely, had deliberately labeled me not as Michael's father, not as Harold Thompson, but as Burden, in front of 150 wedding guests, in front of my son's new family, his colleagues, our friends. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Susan said loudly, her voice carrying further than I think she intended. "I'm going to find Michael right now and—" "No," my voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "Don't. Not today. Harold, you can't let them— It's his wedding day, Susan. I won't ruin it." But even as I said the words, I could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation. The elegant reception that had felt welcoming moments before now felt hostile, judgmental. I was no longer Michael's proud father celebrating his son's happiness. I was the burden everyone was talking about. I stood frozen in front of that seating chart, the word burden burning into my retinas like a brand. Around me, the elegant reception continued. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter bubbled up from various corners of the tent, and the jazz quartet played a smooth rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight." But all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears and the whispered conversations that seemed to follow me wherever I moved. Is that really what they put on his card? That's Michael's father, isn't it? The one who— I heard Jessica had issues with him, but this is just cruel. Susan gripped my arm tightly, her face flushed with indignation. "Harold, we're not letting this stand. I don't care if it's their wedding day. This is unconscionable." I pulled away gently, straightening my shoulders despite the weight pressing down on them. I said, "No, Susan. I meant it, but people are staring, talking. Let them talk." The words came out steadier than I felt. I've survived worse things than gossip. Have I, though? Standing there in my best suit, the navy blue one Martha had picked out for me 3 Christmases ago, I tried to remember when I'd last felt this small, this humiliated. Even during the worst days after Martha's death, when grief had hollowed me out until I was barely functional, at least I'd had my dignity. Now I had a table assignment that announced to everyone present that my own family considered me dead weight. I walked toward table 12 with as much composure as I could muster, Susan trailing behind me like a protective guard dog. The table sat in what I now realized was the furthest corner from the head table, partially hidden behind one of the elaborate floral arrangements. Of the 10 seats, only 3 were occupied, an elderly couple I didn't recognize, and a middle-aged woman who looked vaguely familiar. "You must be Harold," the woman said as I approached. Her voice carried a slight southern accent and genuine warmth. "I'm Patricia Williams, Jessica's great-aunt. I was wondering who else they'd stuck back here in Siberia." I managed a weak smile. "Nice to meet you, Patricia." "Oh, honey," she continued, apparently oblivious to the label on my place card. "I wouldn't take it personally. Jessica's always been particular about her arrangements. Bless her heart, she's got opinions about everything." The elderly couple, the Hendersons according to their place cards, nodded sympathetically. "We're neighbors from Jessica's childhood street," Mrs. Henderson explained. "Haven't seen her in probably 15 years, but we got invited anyway. Guess we don't rate the good tables either." Their casual acceptance of our exile made me feel slightly better, though the pit in my stomach remained. At least they hadn't seen my place card. At least they weren't looking at me with pity or disgust. I took my seat, the one with Burden neatly printed where my name should have been, and tried to focus on the view. From here, I could see Michael and Jessica at the head table, radiant and laughing with their wedding party. My son looked genuinely happy, more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. That was what mattered. That had to be what mattered. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." The DJ's announcement drew everyone's attention to the tent entrance, where Michael and Jessica made their grand entrance as husband and wife. Applause thundered through the space as they walked hand in hand to the dance floor for their first dance. The song was At Last by Etta James, Martha's favorite. She used to hum it while cooking dinner, swaying her hips in that unconscious way that always made me smile. I watched my son hold his new wife close, spinning her gently under the twinkling lights, and for a moment the hurt faded into something softer. He deserved this happiness. After everything he'd been through, losing his mother so young, watching me spiral into depression afterward, having to be the strong one when I should have been taking care of him, Michael deserved every moment of joy, even if it meant I had to sit in the corner marked as a burden. "He's a good-looking boy," Patricia observed, following my gaze. "Takes after his daddy, I imagine." "He takes after his mother," I replied automatically. "She was the beautiful one in the family." "Was?" "She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer." Patricia's expression softened immediately. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That must have been terrible for both of you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The grief counselor had warned me that weddings, graduations, and other milestone events would be especially difficult. "She would have loved today," I managed. "Would have cried through the whole ceremony and danced until her feet hurt." "I bet she would have," Patricia agreed gently. "And I bet she'd be proud of how you're handling yourself right now. If only she knew about the place card. If only she understood that Martha's husband, the man she'd loved for 42 years, was sitting at the reject table with a label that reduced him to a single devastating word." The first dance ended to enthusiastic applause, and the DJ invited everyone to join the couple on the dance floor. I watched as family and friends paired off, filling the space with movement and laughter. Jessica's parents, Robert and Caroline Williams, cut elegant figures as they waltzed near the center of the floor. They'd been polite but distant when I'd met them earlier, the kind of wealthy people who were too well-bred to be openly rude, but made their judgment clear through subtle exclusions, like seating charts. "Excuse me, are you Harold Thompson?" I turned to find a young man in an expensive suit standing beside our table. He had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to, and his smile was perfectly practiced. "Yes, I am. Derek Patterson. I work with Michael at the firm. He's mentioned you many times." I stood and shook his hand, wondering what exactly Michael had said about me. "Nice to meet you, Derek. I just wanted to say how sorry I was to hear about your wife. Michael spoke about her often, said she was an incredible woman." "She was," I agreed, grateful for the genuine sympathy in his voice. Derek glanced around our isolated table, his expression puzzled. "I have to ask, why are you sitting all the way back here? Shouldn't the father of the groom be at the head table, or at least closer to the action?" Heat flooded my cheeks again. "Oh, you know how these things go. Lots of family politics in seating arrangements." But Derek wasn't buying the casual explanation. His eyes had found my place card, and I watched his expression change from confusion to shock to barely concealed anger. That's not right," he said quietly. "Michael would never. He talks about you like you're his hero." Hero? The word hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time I'd felt heroic? When was the last time I'd felt like anything other than exactly what that place card proclaimed? A burden on everyone around me. Things change, I said simply. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but a commotion near the head table drew our attention. Jessica was standing, her face animated as she spoke to someone I couldn't see clearly. Her gestures were sharp, aggressive, the body language of someone making a point they intended to stick. A moment later, Michael appeared in her line of sight, his expression troubled. He said something to his new wife, placing a hand on her arm that she immediately shrugged off. Even from across the tent, I could see the tension radiating from both of them. Trouble in paradise already, Patricia murmured from beside me. Before I could respond, I noticed Father Martinez making his way through the crowd toward the small stage where the DJ had set up his equipment. The priest who had performed the ceremony looked unusually serious, his typically warm expression replaced by something I couldn't quite read. He reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." Father Martinez's voice cut through the music and conversation, bringing the entire reception to a halt. "I know this is unusual, but there's something I need to share with all of you before we continue the celebration." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica's face had gone pale, and she was shaking her head vigorously at someone behind the head table. Michael looked confused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. For the first time all day, my son looked directly at me, and the expression on his face was one of dawning horror. He knew. Somehow he'd discovered what had been done to me. "You see," Father Martinez continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent tent, "I've been watching something unfold today that troubles me deeply. Something that goes against everything this celebration should represent." My heart hammered against my ribs. Every eye in the place seemed to be turning toward our corner table, toward the man marked as a burden. I wanted to disappear, to slip away before whatever revelation was coming could humiliate me further. But Susan's hand closed over mine, holding me in place. "Stay," she whispered. "Just stay." Father Martinez cleared his throat and looked directly across the tent at me. It's time everyone here knew the truth about Harold Thompson. But the silence in the tent was deafening. Every conversation had stopped. Every glass had been set down. Every dancer had frozen in place. Father Martinez stood at the microphone with the gravity of someone about to deliver a sermon that would change lives, and maybe he was. I felt like I was drowning in that silence, in the weight of 150 pairs of eyes that had turned to stare at me. The burden place card seemed to glow under the tent lights, a scarlet letter announcing my shame to everyone present. "Please," I whispered to Susan, trying to rise from my chair. "I can't." "Sit down, Harold." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "For once in your life, let someone else fight for you." Jessica had pushed through the crowd and was now standing directly in front of Father Martinez, her wedding gown rustling with agitation. Even from across the tent, I could see her lips moving urgently, her hands gesturing in sharp, desperate motions. She was trying to stop him, trying to prevent whatever he was about to say, but Father Martinez gently moved her aside and adjusted the microphone. "I've known Harold Thompson for 15 years, he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly still reception. "I married him to Martha, baptized his grandson, and held his hand through the darkest period of his life when cancer took his beloved wife." My throat constricted at the mention of Martha. Several guests turned to look at me with newfound interest, or was it pity? I couldn't tell anymore. "What many of you don't know," Father Martinez continued, "is the story of what Harold did after Martha died. What he sacrificed, what he gave up without ever asking for credit or recognition." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "No," I breathed. "Please don't." But the priest wasn't finished. You see, when Martha passed away, Harold wasn't just grieving a wife. He was facing financial ruin. The medical bills from her 2-year fight with cancer had depleted their retirement savings. The mortgage on the house they'd lived in for 30 years was in default. At 70 years old, Harold was looking at bankruptcy and homelessness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt heat flooding my face, shame mixing with a grief I thought I'd learned to manage. These weren't stories I'd ever wanted told, especially not here, not now. "Harold," Susan whispered beside me, "why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Because what was the point? Because admitting you failed as a provider, as a husband, as a man, doesn't get any easier with age. Because sometimes the only dignity left is in suffering silently. Father Martinez's voice grew stronger. "But Harold didn't declare bankruptcy. He didn't lose the house. Do you know why?" Jessica was standing frozen now, her face ashen. Behind her, Michael had pushed through the crowd and was staring at the priest with an expression of dawning understanding and horror. Because, Father Martinez continued, Harold had one asset left, one thing of value that could save him from losing everything Martha had loved. My hands were shaking now, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady them. The elderly couple beside me, the Hendersons, were watching me with expressions of growing amazement. Harold owned a 1967 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500, his pride and joy. A car he'd restored by hand over the course of 20 years, working on it every weekend in his garage while Martha brought him sandwiches and lemonade. That car was worth enough to pay off the medical bills, save the house, and give him a small cushion to live on. The jazz quartet had stopped playing entirely now. Even the waiters had paused in their duties to listen. So, Harold sold the Mustang. But here's what makes this man extraordinary. He didn't keep the money for himself. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the tent. This wasn't how the story was supposed to be told. This wasn't how anyone was supposed to find out. Harold gave every penny from that sale to his son, Michael, who was struggling to make ends meet as a young lawyer drowning in student debt. Michael had just started at the firm, wasn't making much money, and was about to lose his apartment. His father's gift, given without fanfare, without conditions, without ever mentioning the sacrifice, allowed Michael to stabilize his life and focus on building his career. Michael's face had gone white. He was staring at me across the tent with an expression I'd never seen before, shock, gratitude, and something that looked like devastation. But that's not all, Father Martinez continued, and my heart sank even further. When Harold gave away his financial cushion, he couldn't afford to keep the house anymore. So he sold it, the house where he and Martha had raised Michael, where every room held 40 years of memories, and moved into a small senior apartment complex. "Oh, Harold," Patricia whispered beside me, her hand flying to her chest. He told everyone, including Michael, that he wanted to downsize anyway, that the house was too big for one person, that he was happier in a smaller place. But the truth is, Harold gave up everything, his car, his home, his financial security, so his son could build the life that led to this moment. The silence stretched on, heavy and profound. I could feel tears threatening, could feel the careful composure I'd maintained all day crumbling like a dam under pressure. "And here's what breaks my heart," Father Martinez said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "Harold has attended every one of Michael's important moments since then. Law school graduation, bar exam celebration, promotion parties. He's been there with a smile and a proud word, never once mentioning what he gave up to make it all possible." I looked up to find Michael pushing through the crowd, his face streaked with tears. Jessica grabbed his arm, trying to stop him, but he shook her off and kept coming toward my table. "Harold never asked for credit," the priest continued, "never expected gratitude, never even told his son the truth about the sacrifices he made. He just loved quietly, gave freely, and asked for nothing in return except to be part of his son's life." My vision was blurring now, years of suppressed emotion threatening to spill over. Around me, the wedding guests sat in stunned silence, many of them staring at the Burden place card with expressions of horror and shame. So when I see this man, this loving father who gave up everything for his child's happiness, labeled as a burden and hidden away in the corner at his son's wedding, Father Martinez's voice cracked with emotion. When I see that, I have to speak up. Because if Harold Thompson is a burden, then we should all hope to be such blessed burdens. The priest set down the microphone with shaking hands and stepped away from the stage. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of approaching footsteps. Michael, my son, reached my table and dropped to his knees beside my chair, his expensive tuxedo hitting the grass without regard for stains or damage. His face was streaked with tears, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't know about the place card, about any of it. I swear to God, I didn't know." I looked down at my son, my successful, accomplished son who had achieved everything Martha and I had dreamed for him, and saw the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. "It's okay," I managed, though the words came out cracked and broken. "It's your wedding day. You should be celebrating." "No." Michael's voice was fierce now, angry. "It's not okay. None of this is okay." He stood up and turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying across the tent. "My father sold his most prized possession to help me start my career. He gave up the house I grew up in to give me a chance at success. And his voice broke. "I let someone treat him like this." Jessica had been standing frozen near the head table, but now she was moving toward us, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Michael, please, let's not make a scene. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Michael's voice rose to near shouting. "You labeled my father as a burden in front of our entire wedding party." The confrontation I'd tried to avoid was happening anyway, playing out in front of everyone we knew. But as I watched my son stand up for me, really stand up for me, possibly for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside my chest. Maybe I wasn't just a burden after all. Maybe sometimes love was worth fighting for. Soisi Methuskan, the confrontation between Michael and Jessica, was unfolding like a car crash in slow motion, and I was helpless to stop it. Every instinct told me to intervene, to smooth things over, to protect my son's happiness on what was supposed to be the most important day of his life. But Susan's hand remained firmly on my arm, keeping me in place. "Let them work this out," she whispered fiercely. "You've spent too many years making yourself smaller for other people's comfort." Jessica's composure was cracking under the weight of 150 stares and her new husband's barely contained fury. "Michael, you're overreacting. It was meant as a private joke between the wedding planners. No one was supposed to notice." "A private joke?" Michael's voice carried across the tent, and I watched several guests lean forward to catch every word. "You thought labeling my father as a burden would be funny? You don't understand the pressure I've been under," Jessica said, her voice rising to match his. "Planning this wedding, dealing with your family dynamics, trying to make everything perfect." "My family dynamics?" Michael stepped closer to his new wife, and I could see the tension radiating from his shoulders. What exactly is that supposed to mean? For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely flustered. Her perfect wedding makeup was beginning to smudge, and her hands were shaking as she gestured toward me. "He's always there, Michael. Always calling, always needing something. Always making you feel guilty because of what happened to your mother. I thought maybe if he understood that this was our day, our new beginning." "Understood what, exactly?" Michael's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. "That the man who sacrificed everything for my success isn't welcome at my wedding." I couldn't take it anymore. Wedding day or not, this had gone too far. I pushed myself up from the table, my legs unsteady but my resolve firm. "Stop," I said, loud enough for both of them to hear. "Please, just stop." Both Michael and Jessica turned to look at me, their faces reflecting different versions of anguish. Around us, the wedding guests watched with the fascination of spectators at a particularly dramatic theater performance. "Jessica," I said, walking slowly toward her, "I want to apologize." "Dad, no," Michael started. "Let me finish." I held up a hand to quiet my son. "Jessica, I want to apologize if I've ever made you feel like I was intruding on your relationship with Michael. That was never my intention." She stared at me with wide eyes, clearly not expecting this response. I know what it's like to be a young bride, worried about outside influences on your marriage. Martha felt the same way about my mother when we first got married." I managed a small smile at the memory. "Mothers-in-law can be challenging. Maybe fathers-in-law can be too." "Harold," Patricia called from behind me, "you don't owe anyone an apology. Not after what we just heard." But I pressed on, ignoring the murmurs of agreement from various corners of the tent. "The truth is, I have been calling more often since Martha died. I have been needier, I suppose. When you lose your life partner, you forget how to be alone. Sometimes I probably did lean on Michael more than I should have. But Dad," Michael's voice was thick with emotion, "you never asked for anything unreasonable. I asked for attention," I said simply. "I asked for time. I asked for connection, and those things have value, even if they don't come with a price tag." I turned back to Jessica, who was now crying openly, her careful composure completely shattered. "What I don't understand, Jessica, is why you didn't just talk to me. Why you didn't tell me you needed space or that my presence was causing problems. I would have listened. Because you're so..." She struggled for words, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're so sad all the time, so lonely, and it makes Michael sad, and then he feels guilty, and then he can't focus on us, on our future. I just wanted my husband to be happy without constantly worrying about you." The honesty in her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "You're right," I said quietly. "I have been sad. I have been lonely. Losing Martha was like losing half of myself, and I never really learned how to function as just Harold instead of Harold and Martha." If this story is touching your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this, because sometimes the most difficult truths are the ones that bring us together. I could see Michael struggling with emotions I'd never seen him express: guilt, love, frustration, and something that looked like grief for opportunities lost. "But Jessica," I continued, "what you did today wasn't about protecting your marriage. It was about humiliating me in front of everyone who matters to both of us. And that kind of cruelty, that's not who I thought you were." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the car, about the house. Michael never told me what you'd given up for him." "Because he didn't know," I said, glancing at my son. "Because I never told him." Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of pain and revelation. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you tell me? If I'd known you were struggling, if I'd known what you'd sacrificed—" "Because that's not how love works," I said simply. "You don't sacrifice for someone so they'll owe you something. You sacrifice because their happiness matters more than your comfort. And your happiness, Michael, your success, your future with Jessica, that's been worth every penny I spent, every memory I gave up." The tent had fallen completely silent again. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, transfixed by the drama unfolding before them. "But I could have helped," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I could have paid you back, could have made sure you didn't have to give up the house." "And then what?" I asked gently. "You would have spent your 20s and 30s feeling obligated to take care of your old man instead of building your own life. You would have stayed close out of duty instead of choice. You might never have met Jessica, never have had the confidence to pursue the partnerships at your firm, never have become the man you are today." I looked around the tent at all the faces watching us, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, all deeply engaged in this most private of family moments being played out in public. "I don't regret my choices," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I regret that they've been misunderstood, and I regret that today's celebration has been tainted by all of this. But I don't regret loving my son enough to give him the best possible start in life." Derek Patterson, the young lawyer who'd approached me earlier, suddenly spoke up from somewhere in the crowd. "Mr. Thompson, I think you should know, Michael talks about you at the office all the time, about how proud he is of you, how much he wishes he could be half the man you are. He's never once complained about your calls or visits. If anything, he brags about having a father who's still such an important part of his life." Several other voices joined in from around the tent. "Harold, I remember when you used to coach Michael's little league team. You taught half the kids in the neighborhood how to fix their bikes. Martha always said you were the kindest man she'd ever known." The chorus of supportive voices seemed to surprise Jessica as much as it did me. She looked around the tent with growing awareness, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "I didn't know," she said again, her voice stronger now. "Michael, why didn't you tell me these things about your father?" My son looked stricken. "Because I was taking them for granted," he admitted. "Because I was so focused on impressing you, on proving I could be successful and independent, that I stopped talking about the person who made it all possible." Father Martinez approached our small group, his expression gentle but determined. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "this is exactly the conversation that needed to happen. Sometimes God works through difficult moments to reveal truths we've been avoiding." Jessica wiped her eyes and looked directly at me. "Harold, I can't undo what I did today. I can't take back the humiliation, the cruelty. But I want you to know that I understand now why Michael loves you so much. And I want to try to love you too, if you'll let me." The offer hung in the air between us, fragile and tentative. Around us, 150 wedding guests waited to see how this family drama would resolve itself. I looked at my son's tear-streaked face, at his new wife's genuine remorse, at the crowd of people who had just learned more about my private struggles than I'd ever intended to share, and I made a choice that surprised even me. I walked slowly toward Jessica, each step feeling like a small act of faith. The entire tent seemed to hold its breath as I stopped in front of my son's new wife, this young woman who had labeled me a burden just hours ago, who was now looking at me with red-rimmed eyes and something that might have been hope. "Jessica," I said quietly, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I have something that belongs to you." I pulled out the place card, that damning piece of paper with burden printed where my name should have been. She flinched when she saw it, as if I were holding a weapon. "This isn't mine to keep," I continued, holding it out to her. "But I'm not giving it back so you can hide it or throw it away. I'm giving it back because I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember how it felt to realize that words have power, that cruelty leaves scars, and that sometimes the people we dismiss as burdens are actually the foundation everything else is built on." She took the card with trembling hands, staring down at it as if seeing it clearly for the first time. But more importantly, I said, I want you to remember that forgiveness is possible. That families can heal from moments like this if everyone is willing to do the work. Michael stepped forward, his face a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Dad, does this mean? It means I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. It means I'm still your father, and Jessica is now part of our family, and we're all going to figure out how to make this work. I turned to address the entire tent, my voice carrying across the silent space. I know this isn't the wedding reception any of us expected, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. How many of us get to see a family work through its problems honestly, in real time, with witnesses to hold us accountable? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but mostly people just watched with rapt attention. The truth is, I continued, every family has moments like this. Moments when love gets tangled up with pride, when good intentions collide with poor communication, when the people who care most about each other somehow end up hurting each other the deepest. Susan was beaming at me from table 12, and I saw several other guests nodding in recognition. Martha used to say that the measure of a relationship isn't whether you fight, it's how you fight, and more importantly, how you forgive. I looked directly at Jessica as I spoke. Today we fought badly, but we also fought honestly, and now we have a choice about how we move forward. Jessica crumpled the place card in her fist and looked up at me with determination I hadn't seen from her before. Harold, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer. All right, when you gave Michael the money from selling your car, when you sold your house to help him, did you ever resent it? Did you ever wish he knew what you'd sacrificed? The question caught me off guard with its directness. Around us, the crowd leaned in slightly, as invested in my answer as if this were a movie they'd been watching for years. Honestly, I took a deep breath. There were nights when I sat in my small apartment, looking through photo albums of the house where Michael grew up, when I missed that place so much it physically hurt. There were mornings when I walked past classic car shows and remembered the sound of my Mustang's engine, and I felt hollow. Michael made a small, wounded sound, but I held up a hand to stop him from interrupting. But resentment? No, never resentment. Because every time I felt sorry for myself, I'd think about Michael in his law school graduation photos, or I'd get a call telling me about a promotion or a case he'd won, and I'd remember why I made those choices. The pride I felt in his success was worth more than any car or house could ever be. But you were lonely, Jessica pressed. You were struggling, and you never told anyone. Yes, I admitted. I was both proud and lonely. I was both happy for Michael and grieving for my old life. People are complicated, Jessica. We can feel multiple things at once, even contradictory things. She nodded slowly, processing this. I think I was so focused on the loneliness part, on how it affected Michael, that I never considered the pride part. I never thought about how much love it takes to sacrifice quietly. And I said, was so focused on protecting Michael from feeling guilty that I never considered how my secrecy might be hurting our relationship. Maybe if I'd been more honest about my struggles, we could have found better ways to stay connected without me becoming overly dependent. Michael stepped between us, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. This is all my fault, he said. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed when you started calling more often that maybe you needed help, not just conversation. I should have. Michael. I put my hands on my son's shoulders, feeling how much broader they'd become since he'd grown into manhood. You were building a life. You were becoming the man your mother and I raised you to be. You weren't supposed to be taking care of me, not yet anyway. But I could have done both, he insisted. I could have been successful and still made sure you were okay. Maybe, I agreed. But maybe we all needed to go through this to learn how to be a family that includes Jessica. Maybe we needed this crisis to figure out how to love each other better. Father Martinez approached us again, his expression thoughtful. If I may, he said gently, I'd like to suggest something. We all turned to him expectantly. Harold, would you be willing to join Michael and Jessica at the head table for the rest of the reception? I think there's been enough separation for one day. Before I could answer, Jessica spoke up. Actually, Father, I have a better idea. She turned to face the crowd, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'd like to ask everyone to move their chairs. I want us all to sit together. No head table, no hierarchy, no separation. Just family and friends celebrating together. What comes next is even stronger. And to not miss the ending, tap the subscribe button now. It's free and you'll be with me in every new story. The suggestion sent a ripple of surprised murmurs through the tent, but I could see people already standing up, already beginning to rearrange themselves into a more inclusive configuration. Jessica, I said quietly, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted, her voice firm. I spent months planning the perfect wedding, arranging everything to look exactly right for photos and social media. But this, she gestured toward the guests who were already pushing tables together, this is what I should have planned from the beginning. This is what a real celebration looks like. Michael was staring at his new wife with an expression of wonder and admiration. Jess, are you sure? Your parents spent a lot of money on this setup. My parents will survive their seating chart being disrupted, Jessica said with a laugh that was half tears, half genuine humor. And if they don't, well, they'll learn to adapt, just like I'm learning to adapt. As the guests rearranged themselves into a more communal setting, I found myself at the center of a family I was still learning how to be part of. Derek Patterson appeared at my elbow with a fresh champagne glass. Patricia Williams was directing the movement of floral arrangements with the efficiency of a wedding planner, and Susan was holding court with a group of guests, no doubt filling them in on more stories about my life with Martha. But it was the moment when Jessica took my arm and led me to a seat directly beside Michael that really undid me. Harold, she said quietly, so only I could hear, I need you to know something. I didn't label you as a burden because I thought you were worthless. I did it because I was scared of how much Michael loves you, and I was afraid there wouldn't be room for me in that love. I looked at this young woman, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed before. Not malice or cruelty, but insecurity dressed up as control. Jessica, I said gently, love isn't a finite resource. The more people we love, the more love we have to give. Michael's love for me doesn't take anything away from his love for you. If anything, it proves what a good heart he has, the same heart that chose to marry you. She squeezed my arm and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. I think, she said, I'm going to like having you as a father-in-law. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I might actually believe that myself. The transformation of the reception was like watching a time-lapse video of a garden blooming. What had started as a formal, rigidly structured event became something organic and alive. Tables pushed together, chairs rearranged, strangers becoming friends as the artificial barriers Jessica had so carefully constructed dissolved into something much more beautiful. I found myself seated between Michael and Patricia Williams, with Jessica directly across from me. The Burden place card had been replaced with a handwritten note in Jessica's elegant script that simply read, Harold, father of the groom. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. You know, Patricia said, leaning closer so I could hear her over the renewed conversation and laughter, I've been to a lot of weddings in my 74 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened here. I hope that's a good thing, I replied, still feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. Honey, that was the most real thing I've witnessed in decades. Most of us spend our whole lives pretending everything's fine, avoiding the hard conversations. You all just had yours in front of God and everybody, and you came out better for it. She was right, though I wasn't sure I fully understood it yet. Across the table, I watched Jessica talking animatedly with Susan, their heads bent together like old friends sharing secrets. Every few minutes, Jessica would glance up at me and smile. Not the practiced social smile I'd grown accustomed to, but something warmer and more genuine. Dad, Michael said quietly, leaning toward me, I need to tell you something. I turned to face my son, noting the way his shoulders had relaxed for the first time all day. What is it? I've been an idiot, he said simply. Not just about today, but for the past few years. Ever since Mom died, I've been so afraid of becoming like my friends who complain about their aging parents, who feel burdened by family obligations, that I overcompensated in the other direction. I kept you at arm's length because I thought that's what successful, independent people did. The words hit me with unexpected force. Michael, you never made me feel unwanted, but I never made you feel truly wanted either, did I? He interrupted gently. When's the last time I invited you to something? Really invited you, not just told you about it after the fact. When's the last time I asked for your advice or shared good news with you first instead of last? I thought about it, and the silence stretched longer than either of us was comfortable with. I love you, Dad, Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. But somewhere along the way, I started loving you carefully, cautiously, like I was managing an obligation instead of cherishing a relationship. And that's not your fault, that's mine. Before I could respond, the DJ's voice crackled over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the father-daughter dance, followed by the mother-son dance. My stomach dropped. In all the drama of the afternoon, I'd forgotten about this particular tradition. I watched as Robert Williams, Jessica's father, stood and extended his hand to his daughter with obvious pride and affection. They moved onto the dance floor to My Girl by the Temptations, and I couldn't help but smile at the joy on both their faces. But then came the announcement I'd been dreading, and now, the mother-son dance. The music shifted to A Song for Mama by Boyz II Men, and I watched Michael's face crumble as the reality hit him. There would be no mother-son dance. There would never be another mother-son dance. Without thinking, I stood up and extended my hand to my son. "Dance with your old man instead?" I offered quietly. Michael looked up at me with surprise and something that might have been relief. "Dad, you don't have to. I want to," I said firmly. "Your mother would have loved this song, and she would have been the most beautiful woman on that dance floor. Since she can't be here, let me stand in for her." My son took my hand and followed me onto the dance floor, where other guests were now joining the original couples. It felt strange at first, a father and son slow dancing at a wedding, but as the music swelled and I felt Michael relax into the moment, it began to feel right. "She would have been so proud today," I said as we swayed to the music. "Not just of you, but of how you handled everything that happened, of how you stood up for me, fought for what was right." "I should have been doing that all along," Michael replied. "I should have been protecting you the way you protected me." "That's not how it works," I said, echoing my earlier words to Jessica. "Parents protect children, not the other way around. At least, not until we're too old to protect ourselves." "Are you?" Michael asked. "Too old to protect yourself?" I considered the question as we continued to dance, surrounded by family and friends who had witnessed our most vulnerable moments and somehow still wanted to celebrate with us. "I'm getting there," I admitted, "but I'm not there yet. And when I am, I'll tell you. I promise I'll be more honest about what I need, more open about when I'm struggling. But in return, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll stop feeling guilty for living your life. Stop apologizing for being successful, for being happy, for building something beautiful with Jessica. Your happiness doesn't diminish my love for your mother or my grief at losing her. If anything, it honors her memory by proving that we raised you right." The song was winding down, but neither of us made any move to leave the dance floor. "There's something else I need to tell you," Michael said. "About the money you gave me, about the house you sold. I want to pay you back." "Michael, no. Not because I feel obligated," he interrupted. "Because I want to. Because you shouldn't have to live in a tiny apartment when I can afford to help you find something better. Because you should have a car that doesn't break down every other month. Because taking care of each other is what families do." I felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the earlier ones. These felt like relief, like a weight I'd been carrying for years finally being lifted from my shoulders. "Your mother," I said quietly, "would have loved seeing us take care of each other." The song ended, and the dance floor erupted in applause, not just for the traditional dances, but for what everyone had witnessed throughout the afternoon. As Michael and I made our way back to our table, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, people who wanted to share their own stories of family struggles and reconciliations. But it was Jessica who surprised me most. She was waiting by my chair with a small gift box in her hands. "Harold," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I know I can't undo what I did today, but I wanted to give you something that might help us start over." I opened the box to find a set of keys attached to a keychain that read, "World's Best Father-in-Law." "There to our guest room," she explained quickly. "Michael and I talked, and we want you to have a permanent place in our home. Not because you need us to take care of you, but because we want you to be part of our daily lives. We want Sunday dinners and holiday mornings, and all the ordinary moments that make a family." I stared at the keys, overwhelmed by the gesture and everything it represented. "Jessica," I managed, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Because I want my children to know their grandfather. I want them to hear stories about their grandmother Martha. I want them to learn about sacrifice and love and forgiveness from the man who taught their father all those things. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free, and it helps me keep sharing these moments that remind us what family really means." As the reception continued around us, guests dancing, laughing, celebrating the union of two people who had just learned how to be part of something bigger than themselves, I thought about Martha, about how she would have handled today's crisis with grace and wisdom, how she would have loved Jessica despite her flaws, how she would have been proud of Michael for choosing love over pride. But mostly I thought about how she would have smiled to see me surrounded by family again. Not perfect family, not easy family, but real family. Messy and complicated, and absolutely worth fighting for. "Thank you," I said to Jessica, closing my fingers around the keys, "for the room for the second chance, for helping me remember that being part of a family sometimes means being willing to burden each other with our love." She laughed at that, a real laugh full of surprise and delight. "I like that," she said. "Being burdened with love. Maybe that's not such a terrible thing after all." As the evening wound down and the last dance was called, I found myself on the dance floor one more time, this time with my new daughter-in-law swaying to "At Last" while Michael danced nearby with Susan. The tent was full of people who had started the day as strangers and acquaintances, but were ending it as witnesses to something profound. Sometimes the most beautiful celebrations are the ones that don't go according to plan. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when our carefully constructed facades fall away and we're forced to see each other clearly. And sometimes being called a burden is just another way of being told you matter enough to fight for. The place card with burden written on it was still in Jessica's purse, but I hoped she would keep it, not as a reminder of her mistake, but as proof that even our worst moments can become the foundation for our best ones. After all, the heaviest burdens often carry the most precious cargo.